Right, hello. Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Peter Johnson. I'm a lecturer, teaching-focused academic at Imperial College London. So I lecture in fluid mechanics, manage academic staff, and also run a cross-institutional project developing a platform for automated feedback. And it's on that basis that I'm here. So I think we're seeing this week a lot of innovation in using AI and other technologies in education. And this fantastic work that we're seeing, this innovation that we're seeing, is mostly prototypes. So they work locally, but the question is, how are we going to sustain this level of innovation in education? So somebody's built something that works well, how is that going to work and sustainably? And so I want to talk about the architecture that we use, the ecosystem across the educational sector to make sure that these innovations can benefit as many people as possible and in a way that's as ethical as possible in terms of aligning with our educational values. So what I want to do is I want to share some experience from Imperial, what we're doing, and then abstract that into a general case that we should use microservices to develop automation for educational judgment. So I'll explain what I mean by microservices, and I'll explain what I mean by educational judgment, and I hope that by the end I can convince you that this is the way we should be developing these innovations. And I'll welcome questions throughout. Okay, so before I start, I'll just show you an example of what I mean so that this is grounded in reality. So I'll show you a student completing a task on a platform called Lambda Feedback, which we've developed at Imperial College. So you can see that there's a task, the student is writing their answer, and they're getting a live preview, and then when they're ready, they're going to press check, and then they get feedback. It says incorrect, that group is not dimensionless, which presumably it should have been. And so they're getting timely, specific, objective, constructive, actionable feedback. I think it's good, but I would encourage you to disagree if you want to, and that's kind of the point of this presentation, really. So this is one student on one task, getting one piece of feedback. And before I move on to the kind of abstract part of my talk, I just want to tell you that this has been done millions of times on that system that I showed you for 10,000 tasks and thousands of students. So that's scaled up already, and we did all of that using feedback from microservices. So the platform that you saw there is unable to generate feedback. It's only able to call an external service which will generate the feedback. And that's the point that I want to emphasize here today. So let me generalize, because that's formative feedback, but there's other things we can do with these technologies. So I've listed some here, so chatbots, summative assessment, the generation of the task itself, data analytics, and this list can get longer. My point is that each of these I'll call a service, and each of these requires what I would call an educational judgment. So I'm distinguishing this from automating an administrative process, where the rules are well defined. I'm looking at processes where we have insufficient information to make a decision. That's what a judgment is. And in education, we always have insufficient information, right? So we have to take responsibility for our teaching and make a decision based on our values. And we're talking about automating those processes. And so my question is, are you comfortable using a platform that makes those judgments for you as a teacher? And I hope that the answer is no. So let me convince you. Could I just have a show of hands? Here is a STEM educated, engineering or computer science or something like that. Yeah? And so who would say they're more humanities based in their education? Okay, all right. So I'll start, thank you for that. I'll start with the STEM orientated people and move on from there. So just to illustrate the point about educational judgment. So the answer to a question is 2x. So it's a maths question, and a student responds with x plus y minus y. And the question is, are they correct, and what would be good feedback? So here's an example of an automation. It says, the Boolean, is it correct? Yes, it's true, and the feedback string is empty. So we automated that judgment. So maybe you think that's okay, but here's a newer version of that, which agrees that it's correct, but it says that the response could be simplified further and comes with a tag for later data analytics that the student wouldn't see. And I can imagine a third one where you would say it's incorrect because it's not simplified and that was the question. And as a teacher, you'll be making a judgment about what is the best feedback. And I cannot tell you which one is better. You have to make that judgment as a teacher. So you should be making that choice. So this is an example of the level of judgment on what you would think is a closed case of simple mathematics. So I'll show a couple more examples. So I've cropped these to save the word count, but I just want to show this was deployed to students, and so this is real from the field, as it were. So the question is, show that every element, blah, blah, blah. So it's a proof. So there's no answer to a proof. And the question is it valid, and what feedback should you give? So the student response starts like this: let y be an arbitrary natural number such that blah, blah, blah. So it's expressed in language. And here's the feedback that was provided. It says, your solution demonstrates a good understanding of the P&O axioms, etc., etc. So I'm not qualified to comment on this. This requires somebody who's a mathematician. And the feedback was generated by prompting a large language model. Let's have a look at this bit here. It says, good understanding. So who is in a position to say what is a good level of understanding here? There'll be a mathematician who says it's not formal enough, and there'll be a mathematician who says it's too formal. So it's very nuanced in every different area that we're teaching. It's not conceivable that any technology company can get all of this right in their platform. Here's another example from a school. So GCSE is the age 16 national exam. You don't need to read all the text. The main point is to see the structure here, which is that it's split into content feedback and technical accuracy. So this comes from a collaboration between an exam board and a school. And I was talking to another school where I showed this example, and I said to them, personally, I don't find that feedback very useful if I wrote an essay. So it's a matter of judgment. I don't know why it's like that. And the teacher said to me, I know why it's like that. I said, oh, why? She said, because the rubric for the exam board is in those two parts. And it's no coincidence that the feedback came like this, because the prompting was done by people at the exam board and then used in the school. So you can see how it's this local knowledge that needs to be used. And I've got a final example, which is a chatbot. So this was me interacting with one of ours, and I'll just point out that the chatbot answers are quite short, which is refreshing, and they end with questions, so it's Socratic, it's asking and not telling. And the question is that good? For me, in this context, it was really good. But when I spoke to ChatGPT the other day and I just wanted to find something out and it said, I'll be Socratic and ask you questions, I was quite irritated because I just wanted to find out. So again, it's contextual and it requires judgment. So I hope I've convinced you that this idea of educational judgment is clear, and that there's no right way to make it, and that one platform can't do all of this. So how are we going to run our educational systems if there's no such thing as a platform that can solve all of our problems? But how are we also, so where's the innovation going to come from? How is it going to integrate? And as a teacher, how are you going to have the agency, and where is the transparency going to come from when you're selecting these services? So these are the two key issues: is how will we maintain the innovation, and how will it be ethical? And the point I want to make is that while software architecture is interesting, that's not my point. My point is that it's important, is that we as educators need to consider the architecture that our ecosystem uses, because it directly affects the education that we deliver. And it becomes more important as we grow to the production scale. So this is educational judgment that we're automating. So I want to talk now about that software architecture. So these are pictures that represent what we understand as different types of engineering. So on the left is a poor software engineering where everything is mixed and you change one line of code and something else will break. This was unreliable and slow to maintain. So good systems engineering breaks things down into modules, which is what's shown in the middle. And these modules are defined by their interfaces, and they don't have awareness of how each other work internally, so that one module can be switched out for another. This is just good engineering. That's agreed. Then on the right, you see one of those modules has been taken outside the platform. So that's the microservice. What are the effects of moving that outside? The first thing is, if you wanted to provide that microservice, so you want to prompt a chatbot or do some of that feedback or generate some content, you only have to work on that. So the barrier to entry is much lower. So that's good for innovation. You don't have to generate a platform. You can just generate the microservice. Additionally, because it's outside, it can serve other platforms so it can have a broader impact. So pre-ChatGPT, I found more than 200 STEM-only automated feedback platforms. So it's in the thousands now, and these services could serve all of those platforms. Ethically, hands up who's been through at least one change of learning management system in their teaching career. And hands up who's been through two. So these things change slowly. So next time you get a new platform, do you want that to determine your pedagogy for the rest of your teaching career? So if no, you need to make sure that the educational judgments are outside of that platform and that it's calling them so that you get a choice, and also that the incentives are aligned to be transparent about how these things work. So let me just show a little bit more detail. Here, this is what it looks like in principle. So there's not 3 platforms here. There's a very large number. That's what the dashed line means. And inside the platforms, they're all different. So let me just point out some things. Point number 1 is that platform 1 is served by multiple different services. Point number 2 is that service B serves both platform 1 and platform 2. Point number 3 is that there's a common interface, and that I'm not opinionated about what's inside the platforms or what's inside the services, only how they interface, so that we have this architecture that we need. Point number 4 is that N is a very high number, large number of services, large number of platforms. And point number 5 I've already made is that the internals of the platform are not important. That's not the point here. So I'm advocating for this kind of architecture. Just to put this into more concrete terms, here's some of the microservices we use at Imperial. So we have about 20. I would like us to have access to, I don't know, 1,000. I would like somebody to do a specialist one like the one that we'll hear about now and to plug that in, and so on. I want specialists in chemistry, specialists in all of the different subject areas and different types of pedagogy. And so this is just a few, and it gives you a feeling for what's possible. And these are open source if you'd like to have a look at them. And if anybody wants to use them, you're welcome to, and you can follow up with me. Okay, my last point before I summarize is that if we are to do this, on that diagram, the interface is very important. So if you're going to develop a microservice, you need to know how you'll receive requests and how you should produce requests. So I would like us to create, as a community, a standard way of doing this. So I'm in the early stages of gathering universities together and doing this. So we're talking at Imperial with Munich and ETH, and if you would like to be part of this and make an API standard that we can all use that's open, please could you contact me and we could talk about it. I'd love to get your input on what the functionality of this interface should be. And finally, before summarizing, using a microservice architecture is not a free lunch. There's risks associated with it. So it makes things more complex, and it makes it harder to push out changes to the whole system because things are not synchronized. It means data goes outside of a platform, and that needs managing. And you don't want to do it too prematurely in the technology development process. What I would say to allay any concerns about these risks is that when you authenticate yourself on a platform, that's usually a microservice. And when you make a financial payment, that's usually a microservice. So these are very high risk cases where the risk is managed. So that is normal, but it's good to be aware that this is not a free lunch. So to summarize, I started by talking about automating educational judgments and why that's distinct from administrative processes. And then I've talked about the ecosystem, so not a particular product, but the way our products interact with each other. And I've made the case that we should be interested in this as educators because it has a direct impact on the education that we deliver. If we use a microservice architecture, then I'm claiming 2 reasons for doing that. The first one is on innovation, to lower the barrier and to increase the impact by making those services available to many platforms. And secondly, from an ethical perspective, the education that we're delivering, we want teachers to have the agency to choose which service they provide and to switch that service without switching their platform. And we've developed an exemplar of this at Imperial. So you can use the systems that we've built, so please ask and you can do that. But my point here is beyond that. It's how we did it, and I think that's the way things should be done in general for any platform and for any service. So in terms of what you could do about this, I would say take on this argument and advocate for it with your institution and with the vendors, the big vendors and the startups, that we need this separation of concerns between administrative processes and educational judgment. Collaborate to make that API real, and please come and talk to me about that. And as I said, you're welcome to use what we've done, and I'm very keen to hear from you if you've developed something. I would love to plug it in and for thousands of our students to benefit from it in any way that we can. And if you'd like to follow up on some of our work, then there's some links here. So thank you very much for having me today.